Good afternoon, everyone. See Sunanda, Suzanne, Dottie, Lido, Amrita, hi. We're reading The Eternal Companion, and we're on Reminiscences, the half of the book that's Reminiscences. Today we're going to be reading Swami Brahmananda. This is the Swami that is known throughout the order as Suji Maharaj. On page 115 in my book. So, Swami Brahmananda. He was also the personal attendant of Maharaj for many years. I met Maharaj for the first time in the Ramakrishna Mission Seva Ashram of Benares, which is a hospital for the suffering and the destitute. The monks and novices of the ashram serve the patients with devotion as manifestations of God. Inspired by this noble ideal of the Ramakrishna Order, I joined the ashrama with an ardent desire to become a monk. I had corresponded with Maharaj before our first meeting, and I had read about him in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. One aside here. When they said they serve them as, with devotion, as manifestations of God, they actually do arati around quite a few of the patients every day. They really do worship the patients as manifestations of God in this hospital. In the midst of the busy program of the Seva Ashram, the thought would linger in my mind, when shall I go and see Maharaj? His eyes always revealed his sympathy and otherworldliness, and his radiant, smiling face and the sweetness of his childlike simplicity attracted me to him more and more. At the end of my daily routine, whenever the opportunity presented itself, I never failed to be near Maharaj and to wait on him, just to be permitted to do some personal service. Through such service, sometimes I felt flashes of joy within myself. I was firmly convinced that it was essential for me to have the company of this blessed soul, without whose light I felt there was no way for me to understand or conceive Brahman, Atman, God, and other entities that exist beyond sense perception. According to Sri Ramakrishna's direction, Swami Vivekananda had delivered the charge of the order to Maharaj, who on Swamiji's passing away, set himself heart and soul to the great responsibility given to him. Through his uncommon personality and spiritual power, the order progressed day by day. From Maharaj's countenance, no one could guess his leadership and potentiality. He was totally free from any attachment to the fruits of work, such as hope, signs of dejection, pride of prestige, or efforts to exhibit power. Whether in the forest or in the city, Maharaj led a very simple life. Wherever he stayed, monks and devotees flocked around him. Those who came to see him went back overwhelmed by his piety and his pure and unselfish love toward all. By a glance or a touch, or his mere presence, he could raise the minds of others to a high level and change their very lives. This will be apparent from some of the incidents in his life, which we will mention here. A professor from Calcutta University had read about Maharaj in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Having learned what a great soul he was, he decided to visit him. I happened to be serving as Maharaj's personal attendant at Balaram Bosa's house, where he was staying at the time. Balaram's son, who was a great devotee, had a room especially furnished for Maharaj and had presented him with a beautiful silk robe. One day, while I was away, the professor entered Maharaj's room unannounced. Seeing Maharaj smoking a hookah, surrounded by luxury, was a tremendous shock to him. This was Ramakrishna's spiritual son, whom he had imagined to be so austere. Without introducing himself to Maharaj, he left the room. But he did not go away. He sat outside on the veranda and thought about the experience he had just had. When I returned, I saw the professor seated on a bench on the veranda. Unaware that the visitor had already been to Maharaj's room, I approached him and asked, "Would you like to see Maharaj?" The professor thought for a moment and said, "Yes, I would." So he was ushered in, and Maharaj welcomed him. When the professor came out of Maharaj's room about an hour later, he told me, "I almost made the greatest mistake of my life. I was going to judge Maharaj by externals, with my own idea of spirituality. Now, the deepest problems of my life has been solved." Later, he became a disciple of Maharaj. Devendranath Bose, called Deben Babu, Babu means Mister, was a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna and friendly with all his direct disciples, particularly with Swami Akhandananda. After the passing away of the master, Deben Babu became the estate manager of the Maharaj of Kashim Bazar, and for many years he did not come to see the monks. One day, Swami Akhandananda met Deben Babu by chance and brought him to the Belar Mat. Maharaj was at the monastery at the time. On seeing Deben Babu after such a long interval, Maharaj said to Akhandananda, Swami Akhandananda, "Well, Gangadhar, what has happened to your Deben? He has changed very much, in movements, manners, everything. His face has a worldly expression, and he dresses like a dandy. Has he forgotten the master and all of us?" Swami Akhandananda did not know what to say. But the next time he saw Deben Babu, he told him in the course of conversation what Maharaj had said about him. "I don't know what has happened to me. I am not happy," said Deben Babu. After a few days, Deben Babu came to see Maharaj. I was sitting in front of Maharaj's room. Deben Babu asked me, "Where is Maharaj?" I said to him, "Please take a seat. Maharaj is in his room. I shall inform him of your arrival." Deben Babu's great restlessness was clearly visible. He was unable to sit still. Seeing Deben Babu, Maharaj silently went to him. He placed his hand on Deben Babu's chest, stroked it several times, and said, "Everything will be all right. Think of the master." Immediately, there was a complete change in Deben Babu. He bowed down before Maharaj and said, "Maharaj, all my worldliness is wiped out. How far I had fallen. By your grace and blessings, but your grace and blessings have lifted me up. Now I have no more sorrows or troubles." Long after the passing away of Maharaj, Deben Babu wrote about him. Those who came in close contact with the spiritual... Can you take that off? Tanya, can you take those off? Shut it down.
You got hacked.
There's one more still on John Hancock. Okay. Long after the passing away of Maharaj, Deben Babu wrote about him. Those who came in close contact with the spiritual son of the Master say that Maharaj was endowed with immeasurable spiritual splendor. But nobody knew how so much power could be contained within the mortal frame. The latent power of an electric wire is known only on touching it. We hear that the body of a realized soul is not made of matter, but of spirit. But the truth could not be understood even while coming in touch with this divine man. With what heavenly love Maharaj kept us all deluded. Deben Babu once said to me, "Do you remember the occasion when I went to see Maharaj, when he touched my chest with his hand? I felt a sudden shock. Immediately I remembered my past. Love for God and yearning for realization filled me, and all the memories of the Master came alive again in my mind. As a result, the course of my life was altogether changed." The following incident illustrates how Maharaj disciplined those in his charge. 3 young brahmacharis were at one time connected with the revolutionary movement. After joining the monastery, they were still under the surveillance of the police. Every 3rd day, the police would come to the mott to check that they were there. On one occasion, these boys went to a place of pilgrimage and did not return to the mott on time, which caused much embarrassment to Maharaj. When they finally arrived, Maharaj took them to task and then expelled them from the monastery. As the brahmacharis were leaving, they met Swami Brahmananda at the gate. They told him the whole story. Swami Brahmananda advised them not to leave the compound, but to hide under a tree and to pray. This they did. While Maharaj was having lunch, he asked me to order some delicacies from Calcutta, which I had received within a couple of hours. After Maharaj got up from his noonday rest, he inquired whether the special food he had asked for had arrived. I had no idea what it was all about, but I answered, "Yes, Maharaj, I have everything ready." Then he said, "Do you know where those 3 brahmacharis are?" I replied, "No, Maharaj, I haven't seen them." Maharaj said, "Go and find them." I went to the garden, and in a short time I found the 3 boys under a tree and asked them to go and see Maharaj. When they came to his room, Maharaj told them to forget all about the episode. Then he added, "We are holy men, and our anger is just like a mark on water. Now eat this food." After many years, Maharaj was asked to look at a statue someone had made of Sri Ramakrishna to see whether it was a good likeness. Maharaj asked, "In what form has the sculpture made it?" The meaning of his question becomes clear if we keep in mind that the Master appeared to him in many aspects of divinity. Maharaj laid much stress on the significance of the Master's advent. When such an incarnation comes to earth, much power is manifested, and with little effort, a spiritual aspirant becomes illumined. One day Maharaj said to M., the recorder of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, "The Master came this time to make a bridge between Jiva and Shiva, man and God. See how easy it has become to realize the Lord?" Maharaj used to tell us, "Don't waste this opportunity. Be up and doing. Once you lose this chance, you will regret it." Sri Ramakrishna was the epitome of truth. Mold your lives according to this ideal. Those of you who are working in the hospital will also be able to reach the goal and realize the reality through the practice of pure, unselfish work. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, "Rakal is my son, my spiritual son." The fact that this relationship remained intact even after the master's passing away, may be understood from the following incident. It was in the year 1918. Maharaj was then staying at Balaram Boshe's house in the Bug Bazaar section of Calcutta. I was with him, being his attendant at the time. On this particular day, Maharaj had just finished his lunch. Generally, he took a rest about this time. I was sitting on a bench outside his room when a young girl and her brother arrived. The girl asked permission to see Maharaj. I told her that it would not be convenient for him to see her now. She began to cry. Swami started to help him, and pleadingly she asked, "Look, I shall only prostrate before him and then go. Please arrange it for me." Moved by her plight, I again went to Maharaj. I told him, "Sharat Maharaj has sent this girl. She only wants to bow down and then she will go." After I mentioned Swami Sardananda's name, Maharaj agreed to see her. Later, I learned that while prostrating, the girl began to sob, overwhelmed with emotion. Maharaj suddenly went into an ecstatic mood and became silent and motionless. "Get up, my child. Tell me what has happened." But the girl was still weeping. She stood up but was not able to speak for some time. Then, pointing to a picture of Sri Ramakrishna, which Maharaj had in his room, she said, "He has asked me to come to you." She told her story. She was married at the age of 14. Only 2 days after their marriage, her husband died. In India, this is a disastrous situation because at that time, a Hindu widow could not remarry nor work to support herself and had to depend mostly on her parents or other near relatives to care for her. Her future looked very dark, and in her despair she wept bitterly and incessantly prayed to God, "O Lord, what will become of me? I am so lonely and helpless. What shall I do? Please show me the way." After a year or so, one night, Sri Ramakrishna appeared to her in a dream and said, "Don't weep. My son Rakhal is living in Bag Bazaar. Go to him. He will help you." She did not know anything about Sri Ramakrishna or Rakhal, and she wondered how she could get to Bag Bazaar, which was in another section of Calcutta, far from where she lived. She did not mention her dream to anybody in her father-in-law's household, went to her mother and told her everything. Her mother knew about Sri Ramakrishna. On learning about him from her, the girl went to Bag Bazaar with her brother. There she inquired if a holy man lived nearby. She was told that several holy men were living at the Udbodhan publication house of the Ramakrishna Order. Swami Sardananda was staying there at this time. She told him about the vision of Sri Ramakrishna, and the Swami sent her to Balaram Mandir to see Maharaj. The girl was with Maharaj for more than 2 hours. Finally, he called me. As I entered the room, I noticed that the girl had received initiation. Maharaj asked me to get some food for her and her brother. After this meeting, the girl came often to see Maharaj, and I saw her once or twice at the monastery after Maharaj's passing away in 1922. In 1942, a nun in ochre-colored robes came to see me at Bellarmont. She was accompanied by a young girl disciple. I did not recognize the nun at first, but when she reminded me of her visit with Maharaj at Balaram Mandir 24 years before, I at once recalled the incident and asked her where she had been all these years. She answered that following Maharaj's instructions, she had spent her time in spiritual practices in such places of pilgrimage as Benares, Vrindavan, and Hardwar. Now she was living in Calcutta near Kaligat with a few disciples. Her appearance showed a definite spiritual attainment. After about 3 years later, the same girl disciple who had accompanied the nun to Bellarmont came to see me. When I inquired about her teacher, I was told that she had passed away 2 years before. During her last days, she was ill. One morning she asked for an almanac to find the nearest auspicious day. On that day, she asked her disciples to devote their time to prayer and meditation. She herself repeated the names of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Maharaj. While doing so, in full consciousness, she left the body. Next we have Swami Aparananda. A week or so after my first visit to Swami Brahmananda, I went to Bellarmont about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Ever since I met him, I had been longing to see him again. As soon as I arrived at the monastery, I went to the shrine room. When Swami Brahmananda saw me come out, he said, "Have you seen Maharaj? Go and see him. He is the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna and his living embodiment. When you receive the grace and blessings of Maharaj, know that these come directly from the Master. Have firm faith in this." With folded hands, Swami Brahmananda bowed down, saying, "Hail Maharaj, hail Maharaj." With Swami Brahmananda's permission, the other devotees and I went upstairs into the monastery. Now, many devotees began to gather around Maharaj, including Pulin Mitra, a well-known musician and a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. Maharaj said, "Pulin, I have not heard you sing for a long time. Sing something." Pulin sang, "Mother, in dense darkness thy beautiful form flashes. Therefore the yogis meditate on thee in the mountain cave." Then he sang, "There the sun shines not, nor the lightning, nor the beautiful moon." Another song followed. "The abode of bliss, wondrously beautiful, lights the shore beyond the ocean of worldliness." While listening to the songs, Maharaj became deeply absorbed in the thoughts of God. The sun was setting. Gradually, Maharaj returned to normal consciousness. An indescribable and indelible impression was made on the minds of all present by the blissful meditative figure of Maharaj in that divine abode. On our next visit, we found Maharaj seated in an easy chair upstairs on the veranda facing the Ganges. His mind was indrawn, but he forced himself to talk with us occasionally. Maharaj, his grace and his blessings are not lacking, but how many are there who set their sail to catch his breeze of grace? How many bend their heads to receive his blessings? People's minds are busy with trivial things. Who wants the real treasure? They talk big, but they don't strive to earn anything. They want to get everything without effort. People can manage to do all kinds of worldly work, but when it comes to keeping recollectedness of God, they ask, "But where's the time to do it?" Sri Ramakrishna used to say, "Gurus can be had by the thousands, but rare is a disciple." There are plenty of people to give advice, but how many are there to listen to it? If a man has faith in the words of his guru and follows them, then all his doubts and troubles vanish. If a man has faith in the words of his guru, God will meet all his wants. Holding him by the hand, he will lead him on the right path. What worries are there if one has received his grace? From the Lord's infinite storehouse of knowledge will come a continuous supply. He in whom a longing for God has awakened, let him rise and struggle. While sitting or lying down or eating, let him pray piteously to his blessed feet, O Lord, have mercy on me. Allow me to understand your grace. He is gracious. He reveals his grace to him who seeks it with a sincere heart. As we pray to him, he gives us dispassion, longing for him, and right understanding. Out of thousands, perchance one desires for God. That's it. The prayer, have mercy on me, allow me to understand your grace. How many of us are really ready to understand all the grace we receive every day? Or do we think about it? The Master used to tell a parable about the maidservant in a rich man's house. She talks of her master's home and possessions as hers, and she brings up his children as if they were her own. But in her heart of hearts, she knows that none of these belong to her. In the same way, we have to live in this world and do our duties. But in our heart of hearts, we must realize that nothing belongs to us. Nobody belongs to us. Our only true abode is at the lotus feet of the Lord, and that is where we must go. Shunning all forms of pride and ego, we must take shelter at his feet. But how many wish to take refuge in the truth and in the Lord? Everybody thinks that he is infallible. Deluded by egoism, man regards himself as very important. He does not even want to believe in the existence of God. He never seriously considers how little he can understand with his intellect. Mahamaya, the Divine Mother, alone knows in how many ways she has kept man deluded. We, the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, only know this much. Never try to limit God. Infinite are his moods and aspects. He is beyond the reach of mind and intellect. And yet, if one earnestly prays to him, he becomes attainable to the pure mind. Nothing can be achieved without God's grace. Take refuge in him, and he will open the gate of infinite knowledge. Do your duties in the world while taking refuge in the Lord. First, know him. After God realization, you may live in the world, and your feet will not tread the wrong path. The world's Maya will not be able to bind you. Then no matter which way you follow, whether the way of knowledge, or the way of devotion, or the way of work, you and others will benefit immensely, and your human birth will be blessed. Now, are there any comments or any insights that you've noticed here that maybe you hadn't noticed before? So I say, that one struck me. Allow me to understand your grace. Interesting. That strikes me. I've read this book 1,000 times. Well, not really. That was an exaggeration. Many times. And I don't think I've noticed that statement before. So I think we'll stop there now. Next Wednesday, the reading will be at 5 o'clock. Because, is that right? Yeah, next Wednesday, the reading will be at 5 o'clock. The temple will be open then, and people will be able to attend in person here at the temple, if they choose to. We'll still do Zoom and YouTube, but if any of you want to come, you're welcome to come. We have today is Boishak, the thrice blessed day of Buddha. I hope many of you saw that awesome eclipse this morning at 4:15. 4:15, the moon was completely covered, and then it bloomed out again. Magnificent. Saturday, we'll have our regular reading of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and we will not have a lecture. no lecture in the temple this Sunday, but the following Sunday will be a lecture in the temple for everyone to attend, and it will be Swami Mahayogananda speaking here. So remember that you're all welcome to come to the temple then. And if we have no comments, nothing to say, then I'll close with the chant. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.